Donald Trump just declared economic war on NATO. Let that sink in for a moment. The President of the United States has weaponized trade against America's most trusted allies in a direct assault on the 75-year-old alliance that has maintained global stability since World War II. This isn't political theater. This isn't a negotiating tactic. This is the systematic destruction of Western unity in real time. At this very moment, emergency meetings are underway in Brussels as European Union ambassadors scramble to respond to what can only be described as the most serious transatlantic crisis in modern history. Cyprus, holding the rotating EU presidency, called this rare Sunday session after Trump's bombshell announcement yesterday that sent shockwaves through European capitals from London to Helsinki. Here are the facts. President Trump announced escalating tariffs on 8 NATO member countries, starting at 10% on February 1st and rising to 25% by June 1st. The targets? Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and Finland. These tariffs will remain in place, Trump declared, until there is a complete and total purchase of Greenland by the United States. Read that again. Complete and total purchase. The president is demanding that Denmark surrender its territory to American control, and he's using economic coercion against NATO allies to force compliance. The European response has been swift and unprecedented in its unity. French President Emmanuel Macron, typically diplomatic in his approach to Trump, issued a sharp rebuke calling the tariffs unacceptable. Quote, "No intimidation or threat will influence us, neither in Ukraine nor in Greenland, nor anywhere else in the world when we are confronted with such situations." British Prime Minister Keir Starmer was even more direct, stating that applying tariffs on allies for pursuing collective NATO security is completely wrong and that Britain will be pursuing this directly with the U.S. administration. Perhaps most telling is the reaction from Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who has maintained one of the closest relationships with Trump among European leaders. Even she called Trump's tariff threat an error and confirmed she had already spoken with Trump directly to express her disagreement. The implications are staggering. The European Parliament is now moving to halt approval of the EU-US trade deal that was scheduled for a vote next week. Manfred Weber, who leads the largest political bloc in the European Parliament, declared that approval is impossible given Trump's threats. Billions of dollars in trade agreements now hang in a balance. But let's examine the situation on the ground in Greenland itself, because the facts tell a very different story than Trump's narrative. First, the polling data. 85% of Greenlanders oppose joining the United States. Only 6% support American annexation. These are not the numbers of a population yearning for liberation. These are the numbers of a people firmly opposed to foreign takeover. Second, the protests. Yesterday in Nuuk, Greenland's capital, an estimated quarter of the city's population took to the streets in demonstrations against American acquisition. They carried signs reading "Greenland is not for sale" and chanted against annexation. This is grassroots opposition, not government manipulation. Third, the European military response. In recent days, Danish, Swedish, and German forces have deployed to Greenland for what they're calling Operation Arctic Endurance. Trump characterized this deployment as a very dangerous situation for the safety, security, and survival of our planet. But these are NATO allies conducting joint exercises, something that has occurred routinely for decades. The timing, however, sends a clear message of European solidarity with Denmark. The strategic implications of Trump's actions extend far beyond trade policy. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez warned that any U.S. use of force against Greenland would make Vladimir Putin the happiest man in the world by legitimizing his invasion of Ukraine. As Sanchez put it, if the United States were to use force, it would be the death knell for NATO. Putin would be doubly happy. This assessment is shared across European capitals. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas, who as a former Estonian prime minister understands Russian threats intimately, stated that China and Russia must be having a field day because they are the ones who benefit from divisions among allies. The irony is stark. Trump claims he wants Greenland to counter Chinese and Russian threats in the Arctic. Yet his methods are delivering China and Russia their greatest strategic victory in decades by fracturing the Western alliance from within. Even within the United States, Trump faces bipartisan opposition. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer announced that Democrats will introduce legislation to block the tariffs. More significantly, Republican Senator Tom Tillis, typically a Trump ally, called the tariff threat bad for America, bad for American businesses, and bad for America's allies. Tillis noted it would be great for Putin, Xi, and other adversaries who want to see NATO divided. The legal foundation for Trump's actions is equally questionable. The president appears to be relying on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the same law currently under review by the Supreme Court. Legal experts have expressed skepticism about using emergency powers to impose tariffs when the law makes no mention of trade measures. A Supreme Court ruling against Trump's previous emergency tariffs could come as early as next week, potentially undermining his entire Greenland strategy. Perhaps most concerning is the breakdown in diplomatic protocol. European diplomats report they received no advance notification of the tariff announcement. They learn about massive trade penalties against their countries by reading Trump's social media posts. This is not how allies communicate. This is how adversaries operate. The emergency meeting in Brussels represents Europe's attempt to formulate a coordinated response. 3 options are under serious consideration. First, retaliation through counter-tariffs on American goods, effectively launching a full trade war between the U.S. and its largest trading partner. Second, diplomatic isolation, including suspension of not just trade agreements but broader cooperation on defense and intelligence sharing. Third, a wait-and-see approach, hoping Trump's threats prove to be negotiating bluster rather than firm policy. The problem with the third option is time. February 1st is 14 days away. These are not idle threats. Trump has established a firm deadline and demonstrated his willingness to sacrifice alliance relationships for his Greenland ambitions. The historical context cannot be overlooked. NATO was forged in the aftermath of World War II as a bulwark against authoritarianism and aggression. For 75 years, it has maintained peace and stability across the Atlantic. No external enemy has succeeded in fracturing this alliance. The question now is whether it can survive assault from within. What we're witnessing is the potential end of the liberal international order as we've known it since 1949. European leaders recognize they face an existential choice: capitulate to American economic coercion or chart an independent course that could permanently alter the balance of global power. The unanimity of European opposition suggests they have already made their choice. From Macron's defiance to Starmer's direct confrontation to even Meloni's quiet disagreement, European leaders are presenting a united front against American pressure. But unity in opposition is different from unity in response. The coming days will determine whether Europe can translate its shared outrage into effective action. The options range from measured diplomatic protests to full economic retaliation that could trigger a global trade war. The stakes extend far beyond Greenland or even NATO. At issue is whether international law and territorial sovereignty mean anything in the face of great power ambitions. Whether democratic allies can coerce each other through economic warfare. Whether the principles that have governed international relations for 3 generations will survive the Trump era. As these emergency meetings continue in Brussels, one thing is certain: the world order established after World War II is under direct assault, not from traditional adversaries like Russia or China, but from the very nation that built and led that order for 7 decades. The February 1st deadline approaches. Europe's response will shape the next chapter of international relations. The question is no longer whether Trump will back down, but whether the Western alliance can survive his determination to redraw the map of the Arctic by force.